Welcome, everyone, to our latest episode of Wheels Up, Future of Flight. I'm your host, Alex Ramirez, and with me is my special co-host today, Aaron Koopman, who's filling in for Jessica Kinman, who's on active military duty. Thank you, Jessica, for your service, and we look forward to having you back on our next episode. Electrification, global urgency on sustainable solutions, digitally connected infrastructure, and rapidly advancing novel technologies has ushered aerospace into an exciting period of innovation, arguably not experienced since the dawn of aviation. Join us as we explore today's dynamic industry with distinguished visionaries, chain makers, policy creators, and the innovative ideas that are cultivating new frontiers across aviation, space, and defense. Today, we're privileged to be joined by Sergio Cecutta, partner and co-founder at SMG Consulting and author of the Advanced Air Mobility Reality Index. SMG Consulting is an aerospace and defense and auto tech consulting firm where Sergio leads the advanced air mobility practice and oversees strategy, product management, market analysis, and business development for a diverse client portfolio of worldwide companies. He's been part of the advanced air mobility industry since its early days and has spearheaded multiple research projects and helped clients understand the market to provide tailored products. As a senior executive at multiple Fortune 200 companies, Sergio has been involved with several development and introduction of products like the Airbus A380, the SmartView synthetic vision system, and Gulfstream G500-600. He's also led strategic due diligence on several M&A deals. Sergio received his MBA from WP Carey School of Business and holds a PhD in aerospace engineering from the University of Rome and Technion Israel Institute of Technology. He's a member of several schools and organizations promoting the development of the next generation of aerospace and automotive talent. Sergio, such a privilege to have you on today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I need to make that bio shorter. It's too much. It's too much.
It just goes through your illustrious career. So tell us, Sergio, SMG Consulting, you launched it in 2012. You were a senior executive at Honeywell. And what was the preface for SMG Consulting? And has it always been AAM focused, or is that something that evolved over time?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. So it's the impetus for starting the company was something that I always thought about, having my own company, my philosophy was always, in order to have a consulting firm, you need to have significant experience, and so I wanted to build that level of experience before starting anything. And again, because I think many times we use consulting as a resume filler, especially at the beginning. A lot of questions were like, so you're going back? I'm like, nope, we're not. So we were very lucky to, have a lot of extremely smart and experienced folks join us. And the way that it worked is I personally spent most of my life in aerospace, but I also did clean tech when I left aerospace. And we were doing electrification of transportation in 2011 when it was not cool. It was not front page. And it was a very interesting time to learn all of these things. And we basically started by looking at aerospace and defense. And then the last two pieces of the business is when we see a new opportunity, we want to understand, is this something we want to get involved? And the last two pieces of the business we got involved in was in 2016, if you remember, Mark, Nikhil, and the rest of the folks at Uber Elevate at the time had published their white paper. And so we looked at that as an opportunity, and we dedicated significant amount of resources to learn everything there was to learn about the industry. There is actually even a younger piece of the company. This is the auto tech part of the business. And the auto tech is basically this term that defines the intersection of electrification and autonomy in wheel transportation. And the part that was interesting there is that for the first time, we saw some connection between aerospace and automotive. And that's why we went into that piece as well. And if you look at a lot of this transportation of the future, really the ground part will be autonomous. And then there is this air part that, especially in cities, will be advanced air mobility.
Wow. Well, Sergio, the advanced air mobility market has definitely taken off. Clearly, specifically the last several years, right? And the Paris Air Show, I had the privilege of meeting you there in person, and you did a phenomenal job presenting and representing the industry there. But it was just amazing, the showcase and from all of the OEM players, the industry being there, there's always been this tension, right, from the traditional aviation community on, wow, is this really a market? Is this really going to turn into anything? But I mean, with all clearly the investment and all the showcase and all the players being there at the Paris Air Show, what was your kind of big takeaway? And do you see some of that skepticism kind of lifting, or do you still sense some of that tension from kind of the traditional base?
Yeah, thank you for your compliment. You're too kind. So what I liked about Paris is I felt that for the first time, advanced air mobility was allowed at the table with the grown-ups. I think until that point, we are our own little kids' table where we would eat, but we were always looked at as, these are these kids, and who knows, maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. I thought that Paris was the time where there was this final realization that this is a new piece of the industry. It's just a new piece of aerospace that will be as important as all the other pieces that are out there. I think the other part that I was also very pleased is that we tend in aerospace to talk between ourselves and getting convinced that the rest of the world knows exactly what we're doing. I think a lot of household names for us might not mean anything to the majority of the population. I think they did this survey in the United States, 75% of people doesn't even have any idea what an air taxi is, much less any of these terms with eVTOL, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the part of Paris that was good as well was those 2 days when it was open to the public and people were able to walk around and touch. And I appreciate, the effort and the money spent from companies like Volocopter, Archer, Lilium, Eve, anyone that brought something that was, full scale, because it gave people an idea of what these are. And I think the comment that I've seen the most among the public is, oh, wow, it looks like an airplane. And that is why I am very much against this whole flying car idea, because if you look at a flying car, you just look at a car as big as it can be, and you say, oh, this is how big they are. The truth is airplanes are way, way bigger considering the number of people we carry. And so I think it was good to give people an idea. Now, my hope and my push right now is to have OEMs start flying these things with people, not with us, because we've seen it. We've seen them fly. Great, they're quiet. I understand. We've seen them. We need the people to see these aircraft fly so that they can get an understanding of something that it's not coming one day. It's actually coming tomorrow.
I'd like to talk about your Air Mobility Reality Index, in conjunction with your perspective on all these companies. By one count, I've read there's over 600 companies in this space, and with all of the complicated technology, the regulation hurdles, all the funding required to get to commercialization, there's clearly a demand for an independent assessment of the company's claims. What gave you the inspiration and guts to kind of create an industry tell-all publication in advanced air mobility in the Reality Index? And can you share the history and how it stands and how you envision it evolving?
Yeah, thank you. It was the index actually was born out of an internal need in the company. It was the let's call it the beginning of the dawn of the industry, about 19, when we started saying, okay, so who should we work with? Out of all these companies. We wanted to make sure that, we're contributing to the best out there in the industry. And so we started to rank the companies internally just to understand, how this industry looks like. And then we came to the realization that maybe what we were doing might be interesting to a wider public. And so that's how we got it started, and we put it out there in 2020 and say, anyway, this is what we think. And the idea is, all of our background is from large corporate. We've run very large P&Ls, and from my career in corporate, I have been taught that whoever has the most information wins. So it's all about data, not opinion. And so we wanted to build something that was extremely data driven, and it had no interpretation at all. So the only part that requires some expert knowledge is the algorithm behind it. But once the algorithm is set, everything else is based on the progress of this company. So many times companies would ask, what can we do to get a better ranking? And the truth is, you do your job and the better ranking comes out. So it's a little bit like going to school. You study, you get better grades. There is no secret there. And I thought that it was probably something that the industry needed. Also because I think two reasons. Number one, the usual aerospace milestones are not there. And the one that are there gets cut out to such a fine level of detail that the majority of even the expert have never heard about that. And the other part is also the fact that there is a lot of optimism in the industry. And I think we always need to weigh that optimism against realism. And again, I mean, I'm not saying that we don't want people to be optimistic. It's good. And a lot of this influx of people from outside of aerospace is actually pushing aerospace to become a little different of an industry and probably better of an industry. And so that is welcome. But at the same time, aerospace has specific timeframes, and those timeframes cannot really be accelerated past a specific time. And last but not least, let's also recognize the fact that I've been in this industry for over 25 years, and I've never seen one programming on time. And so, and we're not talking, well, it's a startup. No. These are very large companies. And because the devil is in the detail in aerospace, and we have a lot of details, millions of these details, there can always be one of them that kind of sloshes over the edge of the cup and becomes a problem.
You talked about your use as trying to guide yourself towards the potential best of the breed. Is that your target audience? Folks that are looking to get involved with these companies, and who contacts you the most about your index and the details behind it?
So I think that the target audience was for anyone that wanted to get into this industry, wanted to get a better understanding of the industry. And I think the other part is we always try to add more data wherever is feasible. And a lot of the new data that you've seen could have been very easily one company saying, or one individual saying, do you track this? And we're like, oh, interesting. And so that's how you see we've added the orders, and we've added a lot of these other pieces that weren't there before. Then we added an index on infrastructure. And again, there is more parts coming in the future. But the whole idea here was, if I am new to this industry, how do I make heads and tails? And then it evolved also in something that is a little bit of a way to keep tabs on everyone else in the industry from an independent point of view, because every one of these companies have their own competitive intelligence folks. They have their own idea of where the others are. But this is a little bit of an independent look at where everyone is, and it's something that they've used. We've seen also a lot of people from the investment industry and the banking industry looking at it just to get an idea and another item that they add to their forecasting.
And Sergio, you just talked about it, right? I mean, data is king when doing any kind of business modeling, business assessment. Clearly, what you've put together, you and your team, is incredibly detailed. You're well established in the industry, well trusted, and clearly we're in a period where the market is evolving, trying to figure out viability as the market as a whole. So there is a certain amount of collaboration and sharing, but as you just mentioned, also competitive sensitivities, right? And how do you come across, or how do you get the information? And do you find that people tend to hold their cards pretty close to the chest, or they tend to be pretty open? Is it just kind of a depending on the company? What's your experience with getting information and data?
So the companies have been extremely kind. I mean, without them, there wouldn't be an index. I mean, it's one thing to just take the information that's out there. The first thing we did is design it in a way that was simple and hide the complexity. Because, especially in engineering, we get into this long-winded discussion about all the details. And then, instead of seeing the forest, you start seeing the single trees and you get lost. And so the idea was for something that was very simple, again, and hiding all this complexity. However, the complexity is still there. and we rely on the OEMs to help us with keeping track of all of their progress. And again, it's a cooperative thing. Sometimes the OEM would reach out to us and say, hey, we got something new. Some other times it's the OEM have news and we want to go and understand a little bit better. I can tell you that I think we have reached over 100 NDAs just in this space. And so the idea also was that one number allows us to incorporate non-public information without revealing it. And that is why when you see our update, we just say there has been progress in certification, there has been progress in technology, but we will not go into detail, because that way we can actually incorporate milestones that might be announced to the public 3 months later, but we already are aware of it. And then when it comes to what the company wants to share, everyone opens their kimono according to their level of comfort. Again, we always want to know more, and there is new questions that come up. But again, it gives us the visibility on what they're doing. I think one of the things that it's always interesting for us is their future roadmap, but that is something that it's very close to the vest to most of these OEMs.
You know, one of the things that I'd like to see in a future version is a reality index on their business case. And one of the things that our folks internally are asking a lot is, how fragile is that business case? And our business's certification, and many of the limits that are going to be placed on these vehicles because of certification are going to erode that business case. The promise is fast and cheap flights, but the different versions of that come from the usage that these individual companies are planning for. Safety is what certification is all about, and that means redundancy and robustness. And redundancy adds weight, complexity adds cost, weather restrictions limit utilization. These all increase the cost per passenger. Are you thinking of adding a reality index for the business case in terms of capital, operations, utilization, that kind of thing?
So so the business cases are very, very different, right? And it's difficult to be able to compare many of the companies. It's a little bit of an apple to oranges, right? I mean, the whole idea is you want to become profitable on a cash basis. That is the most difficult thing of them all, because you can be profitable on an accounting basis. That doesn't mean you're actually making any money. And if you become profitable on a cash basis, but again, in order to become profitable on a cash basis, Uber took 14 years. So it's not something that's simple. So we look at their financial side, we look at their business plans, but it's not something that we plan to rank. It's very complex models. It's the same models that, you know, they're used on Wall Street to understand, you know, their stock numbers, et cetera, et cetera. And really, I mean, if you look, there is three main business models, right? Some companies want to be pure OEMs, and in aerospace, we do understand that one. Some companies want to be pure operators, and in aerospace, we do not understand that, because the last time an OEM was an operator was in the 1920s, where a small part of Boeing was called United, and then was spun into United. The last piece is this operator OEM mix that basically tries to get the best of both worlds, tries to capture this large opportunity by operating their own vehicles. However, it de-risks these short-term cash needs by selling the vehicles at the beginning or as another stream of revenue. So I would say it's something that we definitely look at. We try to understand, you know, how much is the money remaining. And again, one of the things that we always say is cash is one of the things, I mean, funding is one of the things that go into the index. And a lot of people say, well, you know, whoever has the most cash wins. Well, that's not the problem. That's not the point. The point is we look at what these OEM accomplish with the cash they have. So it really doesn't matter how much cash you have. If you're extremely cash efficient, well, good for you. And you can actually see it on the Chinese side of the house, where basically their cash efficiency is about 10 times better than the West. They can accomplish the same thing for one less zero. Many reasons for that. But again, it's another part that's important. So really, just their money that they have doesn't matter, is how they're using the money that they have. And that's why in one of our latest study, we were looking at how much of their cash have they gone through from the very beginning, because that gives a little bit of an idea of the efficient utilization of capital. And it takes out this idea that, well, I mean, this guy raised 500 million. Well, this guy raised $1 billion too. So this guy's more advanced than this other one. Well, that's not the case.
I'd like to change topics a little bit to the recent FAA publication, the Innovate 28. It was published at the end of July to lay out a roadmap for piloted AAM programs by the 2028 timeframe, I think, to coincide with the Olympics. It addresses many things: certification, operations, air traffic management, infrastructure, HAZ materials, community engagement. I'd like to focus on the certification piece, as that is what we do here at Collinear. It touches, the Innovate 28 touches on a lot of topics like electric grid availability and building infrastructure and pilot training. But when it comes to certification, there's a tremendous gap in the human resources needed to support all these companies that are trying to get certified in the same time frame with these novel vehicles. Is that something that the AAM community and the FAA companies talk about at these conferences and things? I did not see anything in the Innovate 28 about that.
So, I mean, when it comes to this, yes, I mean, there is a lot of companies that have gone to the FAA for certification. However, not everyone is at the same level of advancements. And the other part is also the FAA has a very large workforce, and sure, it does everything. And, you know, many times we tend to compare FAA with EASA, but we have to be fair, and FAA does what EASA and Eurocontrol and other organizations in Europe do all in one organizations. I really don't think that the stumbling block is going to be, does the FAA have the bandwidth to certify all of these aircraft? And I think there is a few pieces. I mean, some of these companies will self-select themselves out before they get to the point where the FAA needs to dedicate significant amount of resources. And the other part is really, I mean, it is a new process. We have never done it. You know, this we're going to do it under SFAR 2117B. That one day will become power lift by 2024. But the idea here is that we are going to go through a lot of these different pieces. And I would say I would not be concerned about how much bandwidth the FAA has. More, I would be more interested in understanding, you know, how is the FAA going about all of this? And I think this engagement from the very beginning, and the more engagement, the better it is, comes from the fact that in this certification, the FAA will learn at the same time as the OEM. I mean, it's the first time that they do it, and I think anything that they can be, you know, sharing anything that can be shared with the FAA to de-risk and allow them to better understand, it's a great thing. And I'd say it's always similar to, you know, what Boeing did with composite on the 787 when they started engaging the FAA many years before the 787 even became a reality. Now, the difference here is the schedules are very compressed, and so that is the part where I think our worry comes in, is to say, okay, so this is very compressed. What does it mean, certification? And one of the things that we always say is certification is a very inquisitive process, where until the regulator is satisfied that they have understood how that specific part works, yes, sure, there is some specific design standard certification basis that they have agreed to, but at the same time, the regulator needs to be fully happy with their understanding of the behavior of the aircraft. And I think this is the first time that these aircraft have gone through. And it had happened in the past many times that the regulator might go back and say, I don't understand this piece. I need more information. I need more tests. And I wouldn't be surprised if something like this happens because, again, we're certifying very complex machine for the first time. I think also if you hear people talking about, second mover advantage, I think that when it comes to second mover, a big advantage is the fact that they come into a certification process that's already had their few tests on other people's skin. Again, the flip side of that is that we are building an entire ecosystem. And so the later you get there, the more other people will have an advantage on you because they will have tests.
Thanks, Sergio. Yeah, I mean, you just said it, right? I mean, the industry is trailblazing right now in terms of certification. We were expecting to see a little more meat in the Innovate 28 in terms of certification guidance, but clearly still a lot of, like you said, inquisitive and kind of negotiation to go between OEMs and the regulators on what exactly is going to be the compliance means of compliance metrics, right? That folks are going to be measured against. Kind of tying that back to your reality index, is that something that you've thought about including in the reality index in terms of how these companies are addressing certification? Whether like what we see at some of the big OEMs is having their own ODA, right, and their own kind of regulatory. We've seen now a trend of a lot of these companies hiring X regulators to come onto their teams to provide that. Our experience is dealing with regulators is a lot about relationships and trust. And is that something that you've been taking into account in terms of viability, since this is, trailblazing by a lot of these OEMs with regulators?
Yeah, so one of the items that we look when it comes to the index is certification progress. And so we have for each one of the 5 elements, there is many milestones that we go through in order to assign scores. And all of that is taken into account. And we try to understand, how all of this happens. Now, going to the same level of granularity that the OEM go, I think it's a little too much. And as they say, too much in the weeds. I mean, one of the things that I liked about this implementation plan published by the FAA, I mean, I wasn't expecting anything too much in detail because it's more of it's more of an overview of all of the things that need to come together. But at the same time, it's written well enough to give information to the industry, but also readable to people that are from outside the industry. And I think that was kudos to the FAA for doing something like that. Very different from our usual regulatory documents that are hundreds of pages that if you don't, you don't. Like, for example, one page that I really liked in this entire document, it's page 30, where they basically look at the detailed list of activity and they have all of the pieces in this type certification. And so they talk about, conceptual design, application requirements, certification basis, compliance planning, implementation. So all of that is very, very interesting. And if you've noticed, one of the things that we do, I mean, it might have come up in some of our presentation. It's not really something that we publish. It's more for our clients, but we have a very detailed tracking of all of the progress of these OEMs. And we split that in about 10 different steps, but not G1, G2, something higher level from the very beginning. And so one of the things that we have included lately is this TIA, this type inspection authorization. That's basically, it's the conformity inspection that gives you the blessing of the regulator to start flying for credit. And I think that that's very important because it really takes a long time between that and getting to issuing a type certificate. And so I think it's a very important milestone, and it is usually probably the only milestone that a big corporation like Boeing or Airbus will communicate to you after saying, yes, we started certification. And oh, by the way, we got the DIA. That means soon we will get the type certificate. And I think that that's interesting. And the few times that we have shown that publicly, I think companies have been very happy. But again, if you look at that, you see how a lot of progress has been made on the prototyping side. A lot less progress has been made on the production / certification side. And I think that is the important part. And I think that is the challenge for the next year and a half, 2 years, is going to be the certification. And then you will have the entry into service, and then you will have production. And the reason we don't put production at the very beginning, it's because these airplanes are not meant to be made in hundreds from day one. That will take time.
You know, we get asked for help finding FAA delegates because we do have those resources, and they're in high demand, they're scarce, they're very, very unique individuals in the industry. And the answer we like to provide is the best use of your FAA delegates is submitting your materials right the first time. If you don't have time to do it right, you certainly don't have time to do it over, as my mom used to say. Do you feel companies that have more certification experience on staff and in the boardroom have a significant leg up on their commercialization plans? And do you reward that in your reality index?
So, I mean, we look if organizations have received ODAs or DOAs, depends what side of the ocean you're on. I mean, we look at milestones like that when it comes to the certification path, because, I mean, as you say, yes, there is work that needs to be done, but there is also organization that needs to be put in place to do the work. And again, DERs, I think that the role of the DER has slightly changed after in this post-MAX world. As you know, I think some of the work has shifted back to the FAA from the DERs. Because maybe I mean, one of the things that has been found as a point to talk about was the fact that maybe too much work went to the DR, and the DR works for the company even if it's a representative of the FAA. And so that has been one of the items there. But I think that all of the companies, I think it's a little bit of a catch-22. I mean, all of the companies that are at the very top, they have very good certification organizations. And the companies that are farther down, it's not they have bad certification organization, it's they're still building towards that point. I mean, it's always good to have certification expertise in-house. It's just that you need different number of that. I mean, and so I think that's the part that I think it's interesting.
Sergio, we've been talking here a lot about the relationship between the OEMs and the regulators. You mentioned earlier, you know, public perception, right? Getting the public involved at the Paris Air Show, getting, you know, public flying. That's going to be really important for market adoption and viability. I think we all understand that. You know, Vertical Aerospace had a demonstrator crash last week. Again, I want to note that was a demonstrator, not a prototype, not production. Clearly, this is what flight testing is for, but it continues to stress the importance of airworthiness certification and public perception, right? As things hit the news and all that. Do you feel that, you know, between OEMs and I'm going to say government, not even regulators, right? Government, as this market continues to evolve, is doing enough for that public, you know, perception to really have public adoption, right? And confidence that this is going to be safe for use by the public at large.
So I think let's break this answer in a few different pieces. So for example, if you talked about, you know, this crash with Vertical, and again, I mean, we know that's why we do the testing. It's so that these things don't happen when these enter service. However, I would invite you to go and ask all of your neighbors if they know that a Vertical airplane crashed, and they will tell you they don't even know what Vertical is. So really, even this news, it's still very much in between us that know the industry. And I would bet you also that a lot of the people in aerospace don't even know about these companies. So what I would say is, when it comes to public perception, I think that it's an education, but not to say, you know, to say, well, I mean, look, there's this crash. I think it's more of education of the public at wide to say this is a new tool in the transportation toolbox of a city that it's coming to you. This is how it's going to work. And again, people that are informed are not worried. Is when you leave uncertainty in people's mind, everyone makes up their own story. And so there is a lot of different points that, might interest the people. The noise, the visual pollution. And again, the visual pollution is, even if we had a lot of them, this is not going to look like the sky of Coruscant on Star Wars, that it's full of all of these lines of vehicles flying in the air. I mean, but I think visual pollution is more from a point of view of privacy. You're going to fly over my backyard, that you're going to look into my backyard, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that this is all items that need to be clarified. In as an industry, many times we do the engineering thing. Oh, I mean, this airplane is only 45 dBA. I mean, I understand what is 45 dBA just by comparing to other things that are 45 dBA. But I don't know what's 45 dBA. And the other problem is noise scales are logarithmic. They're not linear. So that makes it even more complicated for the average person to understand, oh, by the way, the difference between, 45 and 50, it's probably double. And you go, what do you mean? 45, 50 is 5. Why is it double? And so I think we need to do a few different things. So number one is we need to create a message appropriate to the audience. And number two is to, what they say. I mean, if you can touch it, you believe. And so if bring these airplanes to, more and more places where the public is there. Paris Air Show, great. However, the Paris Air Show is, again, it's one of those in between us in the industry and a few people from the public. Well, let's bring these things to the local air show, where the people go. Here in LA, there is the Great Pacific Air Show in Long Beach. And the beauty of the air show is that it is the easiest air show to watch. You go to the beach and you look up. So there is no fees, no nothing. You just have to find parking. Now, that's another story. And if you ever been to Huntington Beach, the beach is gigantic. I mean, you're talking half a mile of sand that stretches for 6, 7, 10 miles. So there is a lot of viewing possibilities. And to me, it's shows like this where you want this airplane to fly so that people come back home and go like, oh my God, I saw this vehicle. I could see it, but I couldn't hear it. And I think this is one of those dissociative experiences that you have, let's say this out of body, where we're used to, if you see an airplane, you hear it. And in vehicles, usually you see the airplane, but you don't hear it. And so that is very strange. But at the same time, it starts giving people this idea of what to expect.
Sergio, one of the things that you and your SMG consulting team do is this cash analysis, right, of all these companies. I mean, just talked about raising and cash efficiency with that, the rates at these. We monitor that, and it's just fascinating how much investment is going into these companies to get them to market. Clearly, the focus right now is entry into service and all the, that's the goal, right? Got to get these certified and entry into operation. One could argue that's just the tip of the iceberg. Right? So just what is your personal opinion and perspective on what is the make or break beyond just technology and certification for really getting this market to take off?
Well, so I think many years ago I came up with this concept that it jogs my mind in a good way. It's this concept of mountains, right? And the idea is that when you're climbing a mountain, you think that this is the highest mountain that there is until you get to the top and you see that there is bigger mountains hiding behind the first mountain. So right now we're on mountain certification, and for good reason, we know that that's a big mountain. But what are the other that are hiding behind? I think the next one that's hiding behind, it's the mountain of production. A lot of these companies are building aircraft that they know they're not made to be produced in hundreds of thousands. Those are next iteration. But again, you don't need to build something that is capable to be built in thousands at the very beginning. And so I think production is important. For anyone that wants to get a better look, Graham Warwick from Aviation Week has a great article on production. And he was talking to me a few months ago, and he said, you know what, I think that for this issue, I want to concentrate on production because it's the next big thing. And again, we know that if we want to go to this kind of number, autoclaves cannot be in the mix. So we need to have out of autoclave composites. We need to do thermoplastic. These all things that the aerospace industry has not done at that level of volume or scale. The other piece is going to be profitability. That is I think it's the last and the biggest mountain of them all. Because, okay, so you've something that is certified, it can be operated, people are flying, you can make a lot of them, but how does your picture looks like from a point of a company that at certain point needs to become self-sustaining? You know, the companies, the idea is that at a certain point, you use the money you make in order to do research and continue to grow your company. Yes, you can use debt financing for sure, but you don't go back to the equity market and ask for more money, issuing more shares. Actually, the bigger the company becomes, the less share they have because they do share buybacks, but that's a different story. And so I think that is the ultimate hurdle. I would say two things about this. I mean, number one, we want to make this service for everyone, and I understand we want it to be for everyone. However, we do not have to underestimate the power of the early adopters in the development of any technology. And the example I give is if you go into your Best Buy and you see a $25,000 television, you don't look at it and you say, look at those rich people that buy it, I hope something happens to them. No, what you say is rich people buy it so that in a few years I can afford the one that's a little bit smaller or maybe this one. And so we should have the same mentality when it comes to advanced air mobility. We shouldn't look at these folks that fly at the beginning and say, oh, you guys are the frequent flyers. Oh, you guys are the one that can afford. It should be let's get more of you to fly so that I can fly it as well. And I think the other part here is also how you manage the pricing, because the costs are what the costs are. And yes, you can reduce them, but at the same time, the easiest way to do this, as in to hide the price, is bundling and or subsidizing. And I think that there is going to be some of that to spread the adoption out.
Well, thank you, Sergio. And now we'll transition to our prepare for landing 3 key takeaways. The first one, the FAA has released Innovate 28 to provide certification guidance to the advanced air mobility community, but significant innovative and collaborative approaches across the industry remain to enable a successful entry into service path for all. And beyond the technical certification challenges, the AAM market is still yet to address many market viability concerns, such as operations, infrastructure, environmental concerns, and public acceptance. And last but definitely not least, SMG Consulting specializes in the market analysis, strategy, product management, and communication needs of this rapidly evolving advanced air mobility transportation ecosystem. Thank you so much, Sergio, for joining us today and sharing your thought leadership with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
it was
you.
fascinating discussion. We could have gone on here for all day. So we look forward to many more discussions with you, and we look forward to seeing everybody on our next episode of Wheels Up, Future of Flight. Thank you so much to my co-host, Aaron. And again, thank you, Sergio, for joining us. Until next time, thanks, everyone.